Welcome everybody to Gilder Spotlight episode 7. Today we have, I'm super excited to introduce our guest, Ranjodh. I actually call him Ryan, Singh. I've known him for about 4 years now, which is crazy to think. Actually, more than that, probably four and a half, because I started Jungle Works in about May of 2019. Uh, but yeah, so another thing is we also highlight creators, and I kind of would categorize you, Ryan, as a creator and also an
Mhm.
entrepreneur. I'm sure you want to dive in entrepreneurship, but currently you're working at
Sure.
Adobe. But I'd love for you to give our users and listeners a background of yourself, where you're from, where you grew up, kind of how your upbringing was like.
Absolutely, Tiger. First of all, thank you for having me. I think it was a wild ride with you. I remember the time when we met. Love to. There's so many things to unpack here. So again, very excited to kind of talk about my journey. I think you mentioned a few words. I wanna touch upon my recent project. You mentioned content creation. Right. So I think I have
Hmm.
always been somebody who loves to understand concepts around me. I'm a very curious spirit from the beginning, and I think my idea was to not just learn, but I had this inner fundamental desire to also explain those concepts into very simple terms to my friends, to people who are just inspired to grow themselves and becoming a better version of themselves. So that was the motivation behind it, and have seen a lot of people struggling with just understanding everyday things and how they work around them. So I thought, hey, you know what? I am already on a journey. I am understanding things along the way. How about I also start teaching them to other people? And what I have seen in that journey is once you become a teacher, you actually become even better as a student. And the motivation is to help me put myself on a path where I can start making sense of things along this journey while creating content, because then you have not just the desire to make content, but also the desire to become better as a learner as well as a teacher, right? So that's the fundamental idea behind my recent project, Ranjodh Explains. Of course, I want to go back to what you said along with that was where I grew up and what was the background all about. So I have been, my story started in Punjab. That's where I was born, and I'm still part of that region in India, which is in north. West, right? So we our state is right next to the border with Pakistan, and it's a very interesting place that they were born in. I belong to Sikh religion. It has its own unique culture and history. It has its own principle and values. So my family, I belong to a Sikh family, so a lot of things are picked up from them. And I would say I've got the very weird mix of a conservative Indian family but Americanized to an extent where the mixture after 20 years does not make any sense because I think it's just uniquely grown into something that is very interesting and complicated at the same time. I think which is happening in India a lot, where you have roots in Indian culture,
Hmm.
community, family, but you have so much influence by American entrepreneurs, American creators, American movies that we millennials, that's the generation that I belong to, has become this very unique mix, and every single year it's evolving. So it's a very interesting, time to be in India. Yeah.
Interesting. So, how well, there's actually a lot of different things that we can kind of dive into based on that. But I think I
Yeah.
think that's a trend in a lot of different countries. Like I think Japan, for example, kind of the younger generation is totally different than the older conservative generation that's still running the country. But I think the amazing thing of India, when I went there back in 2019, when I first met you, I felt India, they were able to adapt to newer technologies a lot faster than even places like Japan, for example, or even the US, because it was interesting to see that you can literally, and this is 4 years ago, 2019, you can purchase, for example, a single cigarette with your phone. Like you still can't do that today in the States. Japan is starting to transition more over to credit cards. You can start getting
Mhm.
places to accept your credit card. But for the most part, it's still cash. So I think India is able to adapt really well. I'm wondering, yeah, just from your experience, uh, where do you think the future of India is going?
So first of all, I think I feel really lucky to be in the country that's India, and I'm lucky that I'm part of this rocket ship. My friends make fun of me when I call India is going to be the next rocket ship, but I truly believe
Hmm.
it's going to be that. If you look at any numbers matrix, right? I think you mentioned payments. I don't remember the last time I've used cash. I think it's been years. I'm not even kidding. Every single vendor, there can be a guy who's selling veggies for $5 to somebody who's selling iPhones for, I don't know, 100,000 rupees. Everybody's just taking digital payments. Like, it has been revolutionized so much fundamentally that the payment space is just one example of where India is heading, right? We have
Hmm.
democratized and given access to so many people just because we have made it easier to have people who want to do business and to have customers who want to pay those businesses, bring them on a leveling playing field, right? So that's one
Hmm.
example. Now, what's the backbone of those payments? I think when you came here, fast internet was something that we struggled with. Of course, in tier one city, it was there. In the recent developments, India just implemented 5G deployment and it is happening worldwide. India recently jumped
Hmm.
40 places and has taken
Wow.
most of the major economies to have one of the fastest networks around the nation, right? So, be it payments, be it
Hmm.
infrastructure, be it internet, right? So, uh,
And
look at
also,
take an
just
example
to
of
take a step back
infrastructure.
here.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh, sorry.
yeah.
I remember back 4 years ago, you were explaining that a lot, I think the telecom and internet was essentially ran by one or two companies. It was almost a monopoly. Hence, with that,
Yeah.
they allowed a lot of folks in India to have free, like a whole year for free, to use, or not a whole year, but just maybe like a couple pennies a month to have access to internet or have access to 4G or 5G. Um, so can you
Right.
explain a little bit more about that? Like how were they able to let and allow just so fast moving up
Mhm.
40 regs in such a short amount of time?
Sure. So I think the interesting phenomena was one of the companies, and they are still market leaders in so many domains within India. So I just want to give you a context of who it is. The idea of Mukesh Ambani, the brain, that was the guy behind the deployment of the scale of internet that you see in India right now. And he's always worked
Hmm.
on this principle, which is called loss leader. Uh, Tactic or strategy, which means that he's gonna come into a market, completely disrupt that market by offering a private price which is so ridiculous that nobody
Hmm.
adjacent to that as a competitor can offer it at any price at the value they're providing, right? So Reliance came in, this is a few years back, and they just gave you free internet. There's no bandwidth limitations. That's going to be 500 Mbps, 400 Mbps. There's no data bandwidth limitation of how much you can consume. And instantly, it was an overnight success. The rate of subscriptions, sign up subscriptions in a single day broke almost all the world records back then. It was like a wave just
Wow.
flowing through the entire nation. But what happened through that internet access and those signups, right? It gave almost every user to have this platform where they can then productize their services and have access to not just big players but also have their own presence on social media, on e-commerce places, right? So just to take a step back, now the market has stabilized, right? The users are used to a particular internet speed and other players has come in. So there's another player called Airtel, but again I'd say Airtel's again challenging the model that has been existing by Reliance in some ways, although there are still just a few major players kind of holding the internet market in India. There are not a lot of players. Most of the small players sadly has been eliminated. Uh, but
Hmm.
I think it gave birth to a much more larger model where new companies have emerged and the internet ecosystem has evolved so much based on the initiatives that were taken by those two companies.
Interesting. And I've heard, and I actually think you told me this, that
Yeah,
maybe I heard this from somewhere else, that the kind of economic development expansion that China went through
yeah.
kind of the past 20, 30 years, right now India is going through that currently. Could you expand a little bit more on that and what your thoughts are?
Sure. So I'll give you a number that's very interesting to me. And this is just, I think, a week ago, I read this on Twitter. And again, I very closely follow all the metrics related to economic
Hmm.
growth in India. So the average income per capita just 10 years ago was $560 in India, right? Right now, it is $2,600. And I'm talking in the span of just 10 years. So we've grown
And
that
is that
income.
is that per year or per month?
So that's per year. That's per year.
Per year.
That's
Okay,
annual.
okay. So
Yeah,
that
that's annual, right? So
so wait,
mhm,
in just how many years did it go from? You said 500
this is
per
just
month
10
to,
years.
or
So
sorry,
we
per year.
this is
10
just
years. Okay.
this is rough. Yeah. So the amount of income generation that has happened in the last 10 years in India, it is really hard to wrap our head around. And I think
Hmm.
there's no other economy who's 5x their income generation potential in just a decade. I think China is one of the examples, right? But China also took
Hmm.
its time to stabilize their ecosystems, and they have this government which kind of can pull any trigger because it's not a democratic setup, right? They have all their policies, rules and regulation, administration in place. We are the first democratic country who's done this and so quickly, and it's not even slowing down. So if you look at the GDP growth, it's right now at 6.8%. In terms of major economy, it's one of the highest. We have overtaken China already. We are about to cross Germany in the next 12 to 18 months in terms of GDP. It's really exciting. It's just not in the numbers, right? If I now walk out, I'm not even kidding. Whenever I walk out, there's always this new road that's coming over. There's new flyover that's coming over. There's
Hmm.
inflow of brands that I have not seen in my life because most of them are foreign investors. Google
Hmm.
uh, just announced that they're opening their biggest office outside of US in Hyderabad. This is just yesterday's news, right? So things are
Wow.
really exciting. We Things are really exciting in that space, right? So many projects we have invested in infrastructure so much that it's just to make sense of the scale of that, it's mind blowing. So we've just launched
Hmm.
corridor which is going to connect the two different borders of India from east to west to kind of speed up the cargo transport, which was a huge bottleneck for our economy. So
Hmm.
we've solved that problem as well. It I think I don't remember the length of that, but it's
What
just crazy in terms of those numbers, right?
why why do you think the past 10 years there's been such this significant change in GDP growth, in income per capita? Uh, what what do you think contributed to that? And it's probably super interesting from your perspective, because you've been there, but also you the past couple of years you
Right.
were in Cairo too, which I'd love to dive into at some point later. But just yeah, so these past 10
Sure.
years, what do you think
Mhm.
contributed to India's major economic growth?
Right. I think number one would be, we just had a watershed moment. Uh, it was a build up to 2010, 2005-ish. I think it all started, if I have to give you a little bit more context into that timeline, would be 1990s, early 1990s to mid 1990s, when when we kind of opened up to foreign investment, right? Before that, we were not
Hmm.
really open. We were kind of partnering with socialist states like Russia. So when that economic policy changed, all of a sudden India attracted a lot of IT outsourced work, and this is late 1990s, right? So that build up took 10 to 15 years for the institutes to align up, for the workforce to align up, for also the demographics to align up, as well as a few revolutions that were happening in parallel. Like one of them I've already told you, that's the internet revolution. Another was a lot of
Hmm.
people got their education. A lot of people understood, become able, they were able to deliver a skill set that was in economic demand within that period, right? So these are five different parallel gradually building up till that point. And once they kind of merged together, am I talking about around 2010? We have the
Hmm.
youngest population, working population globally versus any other country, right? So when you give skills, when you open the economy, when you have foreign investors investing into that, investing into the country, and when all of those things come together, and you give really cheap internet to the
Hmm.
country's talent, then what happens, there's something that magical happens, right? And nobody really understands, or I don't think anybody can really grasp that, and make a mathematical formula. But when these things come together, then uh, there's this moment where things start to exponentially grow, right? And the
Hmm.
engine of economy starts to really take pace, right? And I think that was the major multiple factors that contributed to India's rocket ship, which I keep telling you about.
Right. Yeah. It's super exciting, and uh, it's amazing because when I was there, most of the talent were amazing engineers, amazing developers, amazing coders. Um, what is your background, and if you can tell our listeners, just I know that
Sure,
I know your background, but yeah, if you can explain it yourself.
absolutely. I think so. I kind of see myself as a coder who does not understand, or who does not really know how to code. Right? It's very weird when I say that
Hmm.
because people don't really understand what I'm trying to say. Like I think uh, I first figured out Notion. Right? Like I remember the time when I figured out Notion. The reason I'm mentioning that Notion is a no code tool for productivity and management. I knew that I had a mind of a coder, but I'm a sales guy from my heart, right? I think I like kind of
Hmm.
bring both of these interesting powers together, and I hold both of them very dear to my heart. That's why when I was doing my MBA, I decided, hey, you know what? Don't really know how to code, but I love being a user of these smart systems, and I love making my life easier. And whenever I do that, something clicks in my head, and there's this excitement that happens. And I would love to bring this on a platform where I can actually consult other companies and kind of bring that value to solve problems, right? So my idea was
Hmm.
to work with companies who offer disruptive products within that ecosystem and be the voice of those companies, right? And when I say being voice of those companies, I'm talking about representing their product and services and identifying problems within that niche, right? So I
Hmm.
have always from the beginning worked with US startup founders, CXOs. My journey started with, of course, consulting startups uh, through a
Hmm.
startup where we were solving a lot of logistical delivery problems, e-commerce store owners, right? So we were solving problems at that front, right? And as you know, I really wanted to kind of pivot myself and the learning that I've gained to actually grow a startup hands on. And when I got that opportunity, I remember almost everybody saying no to me because they thought, hey, are you
Hmm.
dumb? You're making good money. I clearly see that you are on a path, clearly see that you're going to be doing something meaningful in this. But, again, the idea was to experiment, and I've been chasing that throughout my life. So went to Egypt, started growing the startup, and we were kind of optimizing. We were actually facing
Hmm.
Uber head on back in Egypt. It was a very
Wow.
exciting time because I have figured out so many problems head on with of course a great team of Egyptian talent as well as people from UK and Saudi Arabia. But that story, of course, had to come to an end because of a lot of factors, economic, and the Ukraine-Russia war being one of them. uh, and currently, as you mentioned
How?
Adobe a couple of times, I had a. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna just uh, how did or was
Yeah.
Egypt was Cairo your only choice for this startup, or could you have picked any other city in Egypt?
So I was eventually supposed to then. manage multiple regions for that startup,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
I accepted Africa for two reasons. One, I think Africa has a lot of underpenetrated sectors, right? It holds a lot of potential, but companies are yet to penetrate
Hmm.
that particular segment, right? And second, I was just very curious about the African culture. I think they were very welcoming people, and I
Hmm.
don't think a lot of people understand that deeply. So I thought, hey, you know what? This is
Hmm.
going to
Hmm.
be a true catalyst to my personal and professional growth, because I don't think I'll do Africa maybe later in my years. I might want to move to a more developed Western economy and understand how these folks work. But this is the right time to kind of sign up for this project.
Right. And I do 100% agree that Africa is one of the most, I
Yeah.
mean, just the continent itself is super interesting, and there's a lot of opportunities, I think, in the near future with Africa. I myself, I've been to South Africa and a couple other places like
Yeah.
Tanzania and Kenya, but yeah, I think I heard Cairo is essentially like one of the economic powerhouses in Africa. It was like Stanton, which is in
Hmm.
Johannesburg, South Africa, Cairo, and I think uh, it was Lagos, Nigeria. Like those are kind of like the three
Right.
biggest
Yeah.
economic powerhouses. Did you do a lot of business with like Nigeria and with South Africa, with those kind of being the two biggest
Sure.
other, or was it just mainly focused on just building the Uber competitor in Egypt?
So it was mainly focused on just making sure we have a good foothold in Cairo. That was the main focus
Hmm.
of my 18-year journey there, and just kind of growing from there. But the next chapter was to gain entry into major economies, that as you've said, and that's one of them is South Africa. Another one was Nigeria, where we wanted to kind of have a good entry once we have generated enough insights into how the market dynamics work in a continent like Africa, right? Because it's so dynamic, it's so fast
Hmm.
moving, right? You don't really understand when to land, where to land, at which speed you want to land your airplane. When I say airplane, of course,
Hmm.
we're talking about penetrating a particular market, right? It's really exciting. But the main focus was Cairo. And speaking of Cairo, I
Hmm.
think s- s- I consider myself to be seriously lucky, because there's this perfect mix of culture and business in Cairo that I don't think you see in a lot of markets, right? People have this cultural lens through which they view a lot of products, and you can't just act like a business. You have to give them a sense of relatability to their culture, and kind of penetrate that layer for you to become more relevant to your customer. So I think understanding that dynamic and that tension between culture and business, and how to kind of get into that market, was, I think, an eye opener, not just for me but also for the founders. Yeah.
Wow. How long did it take you to kind of adapt to the
Hmm.
culture and basically able to learn the specific nuances to sell to these locals in Egypt?
Sure. I think so. That was surely after 5 times I've given up, right? Like, for my first 2 months were,
Hmm.
hey, this is just not gonna happen, right? Like
Hmm.
me, a guy from India leading a team in Cairo, not really understanding the context of the business, very new to
Hmm.
the mechanics, the moving parts of a business, very new to ride sharing as a business in terms of operations, right? I understand the software side of it. So I think for me, it was just being very open minded and just
Hmm.
observing people, conversations, culture, meeting a lot of business community leaders, and getting myself familiar and running a lot of experiments, which most of them failed, and just holding
Hmm.
on to uh, the resilience of running experiments, but calculated ones, where of course we that led
Hmm.
to significant cash burn, but figuring out a perfect mix of marketing, ops, and strategy that kind of clicked
Hmm.
for us as a company, and also clicked for me as a leader, that led to that led to solving a series of problems that were blocking us as a business, right? One of them,
Hmm.
just to give you an example, was how do we make drivers trust us as a brand, right? Because the
Hmm.
drivers had this image of, hey, ride hailing businesses are dirty, it's only transactional. They just look for, hey,
Hmm.
I'm going to pay you X, you pay me Y, and that's it. I don't really relate myself or my identity with the ride hailing business. Right? It's very hard to give them a sense of identity that, hey, I'm proud of being a driver or representing this brand, right? So we figured out, hey,
Hmm.
nobody is looking after their basic family needs, their health services, right? Looking after their children's education. So that was the approach that we took. Hey, let us give you some basic support necessities in life, right? We want to be your partners. We are coming here for the long term. So we told them an entirely different story with clear, good intentions, and it kind of clicked for us. And I
Oh,
remember a huge count of drivers kind of curious about associating with us.
that's amazing. And I think, uh, you know,
Mhm.
a lot of folks love working with, especially, in the United States, you can see a lot of technology companies like Microsoft, Google, uh, a couple other big ones. Their CEOs are, in fact, from India. And I think a lot of
Right.
folks from India focus on
Mhm.
mindfulness, meditation, and I think that's really helped them adapt to these different cultures and working with different businesses all over the world, pretty much moving them from, a senior engineer all the way up to the CEO of a company, which are, some of the biggest companies in the world. Um, so
Right.
yeah, just how, yeah, how do you think,
Mhm. Yeah.
your journey, I guess, with mindfulness and meditation, and also just, um, you know, maybe your spirituality and what you believe in, has helped you in your professional life and I guess personal life too.
I think for me, I just had a very confused view of spirituality being in India because we are considered to be the spiritual capital of the world. But I think an average
Hmm.
Indian gets s- so confused because we have so many religions, and the concept of spirituality has so many different colors here in India. It's overwhelming, right, for anybody. So I think at the end, people end up uh, choosing their own path and see what's leading them to a state of self-awareness. For me, that was Zen meditation, right? And again, I've been closely following the religious principles, the stories of my own religion, and I think it helps me in a lot of ways. But I have been very receptive to Buddhism in terms of just being more spiritually insightful and developing a spiritual muscle. For me, it was
Hmm.
just a very bad uh, traumatic experience that I went through in my personal life, and I was just looking for some insight into the suffering that I was going through. If there's any learning within that pain, right? I think everybody
Hmm.
kind of hits a rock bottom in their life and they try to make sense of that. So my idea was to, hey, I need to make sense of this because I think there's some wisdom here. So I remember, having this conversation with a friend, and he told me, hey, why don't you go to this place called Tusheta? It's a five hour drive from where I live, and there was just instant, a pull that I sensed, and this is very intuitive, and I could just feel it. And I remember walking into the ashram and immediately signed up for a 3-day course because I was super intrigued. Because the first thing I saw was people just smiling, and I have not seen that pure, uh, energetic, ecstatic smile on people's faces outside of that ashram.
Hmm.
I honestly I thought they're just acting. They're just kind of selling
Hmm.
this 3-day
Hmm.
meditation course. But I thought, hey, you know what? I'm already going through some stuff in life. Let's just give it a chance. I'm already going through shit that I can't really handle, right?
Hmm.
So done that, and I have gotten so much insights from that experience that
Hmm.
my way of looking at spirituality has fundamentally changed after my interaction with those teachers and interaction with the concepts, especially around Zen meditation, right? And I think once you have the lens to look at spirituality uh, with something like Zen meditation, then you start to also make sense of what your religion is trying to say you, right? I think for me
Hmm.
was never understanding concepts. For me, I was lacking a lens to look at spirituality. After that, of course, I have explored so many other very interesting areas. One of them is breath work. Again, this is
Hmm.
it's going to sound weird, but the guy was actually German, not Indian, who teach me the science behind and the process behind
Is
breath work and how to.
that Wim Hof
Mhm.
or is it Wim Hof or who was
It's
the
something
German guy?
similar to. So he's just a German trainer. He's not really well known, but he's well known in
Hmm.
Goa. He stays in Goa. He's from Germany, but he's been in
Very
India
cool.
from quite a few years, right? But I'm happy that India retains that uh, title of being the spiritual capital of the world. I think India inherently,
Hmm.
as a country, just want to relate back to India, has a soul. Like, I think it's a living and breathing country. It has its own soul. You can feel the energy when you go
Hmm.
to somewhere like so many spiritual cities. For instance, Rishikesh. If you go
Hmm.
there, right, you will
Hmm.
immediately feel there's so much energy in that place that you can't ignore that, right? I felt that same level of
Hmm.
energy when I was in Egypt around the pyramids. I think there are places that inherently hold spiritual energy, and Rishikesh is one of them, and there are of course many
Hmm.
other places in India, and we've successfully
Well,
preserved the art of. Yeah,
oh, sorry, you've successfully
go
preserved
ahead.
the art of what? No, what was it? You successfully preserved the art of, sorry, you can finish that.
So i
I
think
just,
i think it's interesting because India very smartly packed meditation and yoga as a
hmm.
product, right? Like I'm saying that with good intention, right? Not to
Hmm.
monetize it, and
Well,
have successfully exported it outside of India, and
oh,
I feel proud about that.
100%. And there's a couple of other big figures, but if you're, yeah, to my understanding, and
Yeah.
I bet you know a lot more than I do. Um, Essentially, Hinduism is kind of the root of kind of uh, a lot of different, like Buddhism, and um,
Hmm.
and so essentially, uh, and Hinduism originated in India. So essentially, Buddhism came out of India, which a lot of people. I mean, I'm not sure actually if a lot of people don't
Absolutely.
know that. Um, but it's amazing. And then another good
Right.
point is like there are specific like hot. I don't
Hmm.
want to mention names just because like there has been um folks that have been profiting a lot of out of like bringing yoga and
Yeah.
other things. But
Sure.
also too
Yeah.
like Thich Nhat Hanh is another person that sold a bunch of books and brought a lot of different meditations and kind of Zen philosophy over to Western cultures. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, what is your? I mean, because you grew up, you said that you're a Sikh. What what was kind of
Yeah.
um, your background, and then why did you have a shift and change in your spirituality into what you believe?
Sure. So I think for me, it was always about understanding cultures. I was a very curious kid from the beginning, and I just naturally rejected the idea of just being born in one religion and
Hmm.
making sense of the world through the written text of that religion. I thought there's just so much wisdom even outside of that, right? Although, of course, completely accepting the working principles, the fundamental pillars of my religion. For instance, one of them is called seva, right? So the
Hmm.
concept of seva means that you are supposed to serve humanity with pure intent. So Sikh religion is one of the religions who distributes the highest amount of free meals across the planet, and
Hmm.
we hold we've been held, we have that record since so many years. that I can't
Hmm.
even tell you the numbers, right? Just one Gurudwara, that's the Golden Temple, people say it, right? In Amritsar,
Hmm.
they distribute around 1 million meals every day, which is just bonkers if you
Wow.
kind of look at the numbers. And these are all free meals. Yeah, this is just one temple, right? So
Hmm.
the concept of seva is just amazing, right? The other concept is the word itself, Sikh, right? If you translate Sikh
Hmm.
into English, that means a student. So I just love the idea of so they teach you to be a student throughout your life,
Hmm.
never have the arrogance of a master or somebody that thinks that I've gained enough knowledge and now I have to teach somebody else. We always get told that you are a Sikh, that means you are a student, and throughout
Hmm.
your life, your journey is all about learning and understanding things around you from both a physical perspective, physiological perspective, emotional and spiritual perspective, right? So just these two pillars have helped me then go beyond the framework of my own religion and kind of deep dive into other wisdom areas or domains that I think are just truly fascinating. And I think that that has just been my own personal preference since I got curious about other things around me. I think there's nothing to do with just being. Being able to hold on to just one religion ideology. Although I'm a very proud Sikh, and I
Hmm.
identify as somebody who believes in Sikhism. Yeah.
And Sikhs typically, when I was in India, some of them
Yeah.
wore the. Can you explain? And I remember when you
Uh-huh.
explained it to me, it was a fun story about
Right.
they wanted to protect their heads, but can you explain kind of the background of the turban around the head for excuse me some of our Western listeners?
Sure, absolutely. I think so. It comes from a lot of uh, schools of thought. One of them is Sikhs traditionally. If you go back in history, they were warriors, right? So in order to really protect themselves, they needed a piece of cloth to wrap around their head to make sure that they have certain level of protection when they used to go into battles. Like there are so many battles that the Sikh community historically have fought against invaders and others, right? So that's one. Second,
Hmm.
uh, you know, s- that is also a symbol of pride and wisdom. If you wear a turban, you're obligated to have a certain path in life which is going to travel towards enlightenment, right? So the symbolic meaning of that becomes that you will do every single thing in your life, every action would be aligned in the direction which is going to ultimately lead to enlightenment in life. And I think it's a huge responsibility to have that turban on your head. And by definition, by the book, by a holy book, you have to be baptized. By when I say baptized, you have to follow all the principle and all the rules to have that turban on your head.
Hmm.
Of course, I'm not baptized, right? That's why you don't see a turban on my
Hmm.
head. But I still believe in the ideas of my religion. So that's the ultimate idea, and I think it now holds more symbolic importance than practical importance,
Hmm.
right? Just like the Arabs have some sort of clothing attire to kind of identify themselves as Muslims
Hmm.
in a lot of communities in the Middle East, especially. That's the same symbolic identity that we hold, and Sikhs are very proud of their turban.
Well, I love that, and I noticed kind of
Yep.
just to piggyback off what you were saying, even a little bit earlier, just the energies and the feel that you get from being in India. Some of the most amazing human beings, you
Mhm.
included, um, I've ever met are from India, and I think that folks are just really filled with love and compassion. Even though, uh, even just meeting with people that were serving me on the streets, and everyone seemed like they were just filled with like love and joy. Where does that come from? Why do I feel like a lot of folks in India could
Mhm.
be, a lot? I mean, I don't like to compare, but the United States, it just seems like, a lot of folks
Mhm.
are, not as, you know, content, let's say. Why are folks so?
Right.
It seems like they're so content.
For sure. I think it really it goes back to the uh, story of India and story of United States, right? I think States, the idea is to live the American dream, right? I think it's something in terms of individual. It kind of it gears towards individual freedom and becoming the best individual version of themselves, pursuit of wealth, freedom, happiness, right? But in India, the
Hmm.
story is kind of in a very different direction. Of course, there are some overlaps. So you might have seen the tagline of India. It's called Atithi Devo Bhava. That means that
Hmm.
we give importance to service of others than ourselves, and we think that is very meaningful as a country and as a community, right? So
Hmm.
we give importance to our guests, our loved ones, more than to ourselves. So India is, as a culture, is a very collective culture, right? It's not very individualistic, right? And it also drives a lot of its content and happiness around living in larger groups. If you also see the average Indian family size, even right now, we're not really a nuclear family country, right? Like, I'll have my cousins living together. I'll
Hmm.
have my relatives living together. And just 50 years ago, this was in almost every household, right? Like recently, we've started switching to becoming a more nuclear household family type country. But I think
Hmm.
the idea of being content and happiness has never been becoming the individual. It was always uplifting not just yourself, but the group around you, the people around you, the relatives around you, before you uplift yourself, right? So I think that really speaks to the spirit of India, and that in itself fuels a lot of happiness of the citizens of this country, right? And
Hmm.
in that is also embedded the values that we've adopted, right? I think India has seen just a lot of trauma. We during the independence days, even before that. So we've recently come out, right? I think this is the celebration of that spirit, because now we've got enough infrastructure, education, skills, that you see everything is kind of now coming at a point where it's crystallizing along with the values that our country
Hmm.
holds. So you see this burst in not just energy, because we now understand how to make money as a country, right? And I think that's a big
Hmm.
solution to a problem of happiness. But we also are holding on to the values that has from the beginning given us a lot of meaning, even when
Hmm.
we didn't have that kind of money. So I think we've solved that dual problem, and that's why you see, and of course, there's a balance and shift of balance going on there, and I'm
Hmm.
hoping that we as a country will figure that out soon. But I think that kind of leads to Indians being happy and energetic. Yeah.
It's amazing. And just talking about shifts in India, I remember back in 2019
Hmm.
when I visited you, uh, the
Yeah.
average rent folks were paying maybe like $100 a month, um, maybe
Uh huh.
for a room split with maybe it was like $100 or $200 a month. But come fast forward,
Right.
you know, post pandemic, um, you're saying this prices have
Hmm.
more or less have skyrocketed compared to just 4 years ago. What factors do you think have contributed to that? How are people adapting to that? Because I still think they're probably, I mean, even though the income has gone up significantly in 10
Yeah.
years, is the income catching up with inflation, or just is inflation, um, is that an issue right now in India?
So I think there are different parts of India that's struggling with different problems in the context of just affording rental prices. Like if we pick up something like Mumbai, right? Like Mumbai has just gone unrealistic in terms of its rental prices. I don't
Right.
think somebody who's starting out a career would be able to afford even a one bedroom flat in Mumbai. That is going to be just
Hmm.
not possible. Either you have to go to the most outward outskirts of that city to to figure that out, or otherwise you have to pull in money with 5 6 guys, right? So that's the story of Mumbai.
Hmm.
But if I have to average things out, I think of course across India, wherever urban development has skyrocketed, and it's kind of happening across the entire country, the rental prices have clearly gone up. right? And income is
Mhm.
still something that has not really matched up with that trajectory, right? And what ends up happening is you see a lot of people settling in the suburbs, which is a relatively newer phenomena in India,
Mhm.
right? So you have these
For
small
sure.
villages that were directly outside of the city, right? Now they have uh, very aggressive levels of urbanization happening, and they're relatively cheaper than, let's say, the central downtown prices in an average city in India.
Mhm.
So what is happening is that's your entry point where the rent is still relatively cheaper. If let's say if not $400, you can probably settle the entire deal at around $250, right? And of course, $400 is something that I'm just taking as a random number. Somewhere it's
Mhm.
close to 800 to $1,000 in some places in India. But I hope this changes. Very hopeful about that. Although I don't see this slowing down on the other side, because rate of construction in India and the rate of increase in price per square foot, right, has been bonkers.
Mhm.
Because me myself, I have invested in properties here in India, and the appreciation is just unbelievable, right? The Of
Mhm.
course, the reason is more than half of the population was just in rural areas, right? They have
Mhm.
suddenly started moving to urban centers because everybody's gotten a degree, everybody has good access to internet, and opportunities have just exploded, right? Now this is the time for any real estate entrepreneur to monetize on that. And we are talking 500 million people, right? It's not a small group that has suddenly started moving
Mhm.
to cities. So yeah, so that's the dynamic right now.
Wow. And so you just said with that, since it's a lot expensive, it's fairly expensive to live in the city centers. Kind of these villages are
Yeah.
evolving, and it's essentially creating suburbia. Uh, are
Mhm.
are
Right.
these infrastructure developments more focused on car use or public transit? Do you think that's what do you think is going to be the kind of the future in India?
Right. I think it was not really well thought out. If I have to critique, the idea, and my one-line answer would be it was supposed to be car use. It was built with the idea that, hey, everybody's gonna own a car, and the
Hmm.
density is gonna just stay below a certain threshold. But things turned out to be entirely different, right? Like you have 20 stories buildings. I'm talking about 10, 15 buildings, all of them at 20 floors within an area of 2 square kilometers or 1 square kilometer, which is just
Hmm.
bonkers. And it clogs up traffic. I don't know if you read this. So two days ago, there was this traffic jam in Bangalore that there were people who got stuck in traffic for 15 hours. One of my friends, he had to walk
Jeez,
for, one of my friend
that's
walked for
horrible.
7 hours, 7 hours to just go to his home back home from the office, and the tweet got viral. I'll share
Jeez.
that tweet with you as well. So this is
Hmm.
the story of India right now, right? uh, Large scale movement to urban centers, not really figuring out how to move that uh, group of
Hmm.
people day to day, right? But the good part of this problem is that in some of the cities, of course, realize this, that it's going to happen, and they are solving at their level. So there's
Hmm.
this new system coming up in Delhi, especially, where they have built RRTS. I'm sure I hope I'm taking the name right, which is Rapid Reusable Transport System, right? Or Rapid
Wow.
Railway
Okay.
Transport System. Uh, what they're trying to do is they're trying to have a very high speed rail network to connect suburbs with the city, so there are less people moving
Hmm.
within the city and directly accessing economic centers, right? So it's going to, of course, take off a lot of stress from the freeways and the highways. And we're also digging a lot of tunnels. A lot of metro projects has come up right now. 22 cities in India are going through aggressive metro constructions, right? So it's going on a
Wow.
huge pace. But I don't see it getting solved in the next 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to be, traffic is going to
Hmm.
be big problems, right? 1 billion people, and all of them now wants to car, because the average Indian
Right.
now dreams of having a car. So it's going to be a
Hmm.
problem for India. I hope they figure that out. Yeah.
I noticed. I remember when I was there, a lot of folks in India
Yeah.
tend to love like Apple and a lot of other major
Uh-huh.
major products, which is I guess good for us doing business as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to kind of wrap things up, one, I'm just
Hmm.
really curious because I did see a couple stats that India is supposed to be the third or second or third largest, I think the second largest economy, maybe the first
Yeah.
largest economy in 60 years, by 2060 or
Hmm.
2017.
Hmm.
And another thing, this is what one of my buddies told me, and I trust that he's been in the business world for a long time. He's lived all over, but he told me that, and he's quite wealthy. He can like afford like a you know,
All
anyway,
right.
he told me that people, especially wealthy individuals, are more willing to live in India than they are China. And
Hmm.
also, just in general, the economic boom is happening right now in India. Just the future is all India, it seems like. So, what what's your prediction? What do you think is going to happen in the next 50 years in India?
A lot of thoughts. I think I'm glad that you brought that number up, right? Like number one economy. So I remember reading this report by this American bank. I keep forgetting the name, but they're very famous. Nonetheless, they talked about India being the second biggest economy by 2075. I remember that precisely, just below
Mhm,
China. So China is going to be somewhere in the range of 52 trillion. India will be right behind China, around I think $50 billion. But the reason I think a lot of capital in the next decade and in the starting from the next few years, and actually right now, is because first India has historically been a democratic country, right? So I think within that ecosystem, businesses enjoy a larger freedom to operate, right? And to, of
mhm,
course, create value. So I think that in itself fundamentally differentiates us from China, where you don't really know how problems get solved once you're handcuffed as an entrepreneur, right? You've
mhm,
seen the real estate crisis happening in China. That happening in India would be a very less in terms of probability, right? Reason because
mhm,
we have flexibility not just as a system, as as an ecosystem of entrepreneurship, but as a government sitting on top of that, which is open to feedback of business owners and founders, right? Because they
mhm,
worry that, hey, if we are not going to support them, we can be replaced. So that in itself incentivizes innovation and growth, and this comes from the ground up, from the bottom up, not from top to down, right? This is the bottom up approach, and I think this is gonna, of course, revolutionize a lot of things. Second, I think most important is uh, the economics, right? On an average, if you want to afford an Indian developer, coder, video editor, somebody who's working in a factory right now, is way more cheaper, relatively speaking, and also equipped
mhm,
if you bring on your products and services to the country, and distribution is also kind of catching up, right? So it is also economically incentivizes you to have your own headquarter here in the country, right? And I think last
mhm,
one would be as a culture, we just are very acceptable in terms of having people outside of the country to trade and share ideas and kind of have a collaborative way of growing ourselves, but also helping others grow within the country, right? There's so many stories, so many founders who've permanently moved to India, and they're from states, they're from Europe. There's so
mhm.
many interesting stories around that. I hope one day we get to talk about that separately. So I think this makes India the next best destination. I think it already is, but in the coming years we're going to see that more in the news.
And I kind of like the the philosophy in India where we help each other grow together, we move together. It's
Right.
amazing. And then also entrepreneurship is huge. And I know that you are currently at Adobe, but you just recently started your new venture. Uh, Ranjodh explains. Uh, could you
Yeah.
tell our listeners what inspired you to start that and what exactly Ranjodh explains is? I know you mentioned it at the beginning of this, but if you can tell us
Yeah.
uh, what it is and what you're working on.
Sure. I think you're right. So I think I touched a little bit upon that, but of course, I love to expand what was the idea, right? So for me, content creation has been something that my inner child has always screamed for, right? Like there's this inner scream within myself to express my ideas and expressed what I've learned. I've been doing that since I don't even remember since the beginning of time, since I've started understanding complex ideas. But I just never really had a meaningful way to share it with the world. So I started dabbling with it last month ago, where I thought, hey, you know what? I'm gonna run this experiment where I wanna make my camera my own journal, and I'm gonna just express whatever I have learned in a 60-second format, and I'm gonna make that camera a doorway to the entire world as my journal. That was the story behind it, right? That was the core desire behind it. Hey, I just love expressing thoughts, and that shaped into Ranjodh Explains, and that is the real expression of my inner child, where I just want to learn an idea, or have already learned an idea, and just want to share it with the world. And I think there's real value in that, where I get to make someone understand and make sense of their immediate reality, right? And kind of activating their curiosity enough so that they pick up a book and start reading it, right? Or maybe that lands them to a YouTube video where they try to make sense of something around them, right? Or maybe that leads a business owner to solve a business problem, right? So that was the intent. And now, of course, with every iteration, with every video I post, I also see a lot of potential, not just in terms of, hey, this was my desires, I'm fulfilling that, at an emotional level, but it's also becoming, hey, this can be a business, and I can actually start figuring out a model around that, which I'm already kind of working on, and see how I can add value to people's problems, right? One of the things I want to do in the long term is actually uh, teach people how to overcome the fear of speaking in front of a camera and every step in between, because I think there's so many people who just want to share a story about themselves, about things that they love, but they just never have somebody who can hold their hand and tell them, hey, you know what, you've just inflated this fear so much in your head, but in reality it's not that much, right? You just need one guy
Mhm.
to tell them and inspire them. I just want to be that guy.
That's amazing. I love it. And I think that that's a great way to turn, because I noticed that when you first, started it just
Hmm.
about a month and a half ago, you're getting, a couple thousand views, and that, a lot of folks are definitely
Right.
interested in turning their thoughts into video, and a lot of, I don't know,
Hmm.
a lot of folks do have a difficulty articulating exactly what they're thinking in their
Yeah,
head into that video format. And I think that you do an amazing job. So I'll link all of that in the description
appreciate it.
uh, for our listeners. But um, Ranjot, Ryan, I really appreciate your time today. Is there any other final thoughts that you have?
No, I just want to add that I've seen your growth curve, Taiga. I think since the day we met, and I have always seen you 3 levels above of who you were when I met you, because I see, hey, this guy's got a lot of energy, smart. He's gonna probably end up doing something that I'm gonna be, inspired by. So I think your journey, especially with Glider, has been very inspiring. And just recently, of course, had a chance to get on a call with you, understanding how you get connecting founders. And I think there's this inner uh, overlap with what you want to do, and the kind of impact you want to have on the world, and what I am doing. So very happy that you overtaken the project. So just wanted to shout out Glider and the hard work that you put in, and I think things are going in a great direction.
Awesome, Ranjot. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm super excited for where Ranjot explains where that takes you, and excited to work on some of the projects with you. Let's definitely keep in touch.